Hi listeners, Jason here. I'm excited to announce that the Psych Health and Safety Conference, PHSCon, will be returning in 2025. After a tremendous success this year, we're going even bigger and better. Taking place on June 19 and 20 at the ICC Sydney, this will be your chance to join the largest psychosocial safety community gathering. Featuring world-class speakers like Adam Grant, Marianne Baynton and Rob Briner, and practical insights from industry case studies. The conference content is all about leveling up your ability to create work that is better for worker mental health and better for business. Whether you're in people and culture, health and safety, psychology or leadership, this 2-day event and optional pre-conference masterclasses is your opportunity to learn, network and grow. Don't miss out. Super early bird tickets on sale now at phscon.com. Now, on to this episode.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How today, Joelle?
Well, I'm getting excited for Psych Week. It's 3 weeks away now.
Yeah, 3 weeks.
Yep. Yeah, it's always nice to have the team all together in the one spot. So, yeah, looking forward to that.
Yep, and you've got a new team member joining just before Psych Week, so that'll be a great induction for her.
Yeah, well, definitely. It was similar, I guess, to Courtney and Sean because they both started a week or so before the conference.
Yeah.
So, yeah, similar sort of getting thrown into the deep end as far as spending some time with the team.
Yeah, I got to say, for a largely remote workforce, right, like half of our team is in Perth, but the rest of them are distributed all over Australia. It's really nice now to have 2 touch points, twice a year, where everyone comes together in person and we get that face-to-face time.
Yeah, I don't think the devs came together in person in Psych Week.
No, they don't like it though.
This is true. Some of them are coming over for Psych Week.
Oh, we
though,
gave them the option, and couple did this time. So,
Yep.
But some people prefer to not socialise, so we don't enforce them to do it. So
no forced socialising. You heard it here, folks.
Yeah, it's one of the benefits when we go recruiting, right? Like, we will not make you do anything that you're really uncomfortable to do, except if that thing is work.
Well, you do need to do your job, but maybe if you're really uncomfortable with that job, it's not the job for you.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, hey, in my intro, I was just noticing I do say we have guests from all around the world like join us, but this time it's pretty close. In fact, I think it's about 10 kilometres away or less.
Yeah.
She could have been in the studio, actually. We should have done that like with Anna.
Well, didn't we kind of conclude that it's a bit awkward actually having someone in the studio?
Yeah, poor Anna.
Yeah.
She made the best of a bad situation.
Trying to talk to us while keeping the mic in front of her face. Yeah.
Yeah, this is much easier. You're right.
It is.
Yeah, even if they're only 10 kilometres away. So let's get this person on. She's a long-time friend and, really great to finally have her on the podcast. So she's an organisational psychologist with a strong background in mental health. With over 20 years of experience in applied organisational psychology, she has successfully led over 100 multidisciplinary projects, across various sectors, including healthcare, mining, aviation, and law enforcement. She currently leads the Thrive at Work initiative as the Professor of Practice at Curtin University's Future of Work Institute, or FOWI, as many people refer to it as. Welcome to the podcast, Professor Karina Jorritsma.
Hello, thanks for having me on board.
Yeah, like I said, it's been a long time coming, Karina, so glad that we found a topic that was really relevant and really interesting to bring you on to discuss.
I'm excited. It has been a long time, and we sort of get a chance to talk along the way. So it's nice to kind of have a forum in which we can delve into something in a little bit more depth too than the rushing past each other or quickly kind of talking about all the things that we're busily doing.
Yes, it is always a rush when we see each other, I feel. So, yes, nice to have a long format podcast.
Just to catch up with friends, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I created this long format, so, yeah.
Well, I mean, that kind of is what a lot of long format podcasts are out there. It's just people talking to their friends, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. All the best ones.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good. I hope that's what you're after today.
So what podcast do you like to listen to, Karina?
Okay, so I don't actually listen to many podcasts at all because in part I probably listen to music more or actually check out from the thinking and the work. But when I do listen to podcasts, they are completely something that's got nothing to do with my work. So I really like, 99% Invisible is one that I really enjoy, and I often pick some obscure podcast about how a font was developed or something like that, or some type of architecture one. I know they had one that was, I think it was called 10,000 Years or something, and it was around what would a symbol be to be a warning sign for a nuclear waste kind of area that even in 10,000 years people would know that it meant danger, like as an example that's there. Or I like those types of things, or even sometimes like music kind of dissection podcasts. So stuff that's going to take me completely away from doing any like thinking and connecting to my work, I guess.
Sounds like a healthy decision for you to make there around what you're listening to. Yep.
Yeah, and we've had some other people say 99% Invisible. I'm looking for a new podcast, actually. I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks lately, so I might give it a shot.
Tell us about your professional career, please.
Okay, I guess as Jason introduced me, I'm an org psych researcher. I'm in this space for about 20 years, and I guess I've spent that whole of my time actually unintentionally so kind of being within a university, but also trying very hard to be quite in the space of bridging research and practice, or really trying to contribute and improve both of those sides that are there. So a lot of it's really been about not just sort of what can we translate and how can we apply work, but really also the work of, the research that comes out of organisational psychology, but also kind of going the other way back, I guess, and really going, okay, when we try this or it's not really meeting the needs of practice, how do I feed that back to kind of shaping the research agenda and those sorts of things? So we kind of, I know that nowadays people use sometimes the term, pracademic that sits in the space. That definitely was not a term that existed, 20 years ago, but I guess it's also, a space of, we sometimes call it challenge framing kind of space, which is the space in which we know some stuff potentially as researchers, industry or professionals know some stuff, but combined we don't know all of the stuff. And so there's this really lovely third space in which if we can kind of work on those problems together has always been something I'm really interested in. I began my career and my interests a lot more around physical safety. I actually began around near misses in hospitals. And back then, Amy Edmondson, psych safety stuff was right hot off the press, and there was all of these questions that were there. Wouldn't have picked that was going to be the revival that was there, as constructs in my own PhD. But I guess the stuff that I was also really interested in was moving beyond just a focus on individuals in that through to the work and the systems that were contributing to people's behaviour. And I guess that parallels sort of the interest that I've had in more recent years, the last decade or so, which has been around the psychological, health and well-being side of things, and really also that focus on it not just being about individual and their behaviour or individual resilience, but also around the work and the systems that are there. So I guess something that is probably not new to your listeners now, or, is at the heart of what we're all doing, is kind of when we're talking about psychosocial risk, that's there. So, yeah. And I guess also, as Jason alluded to in the intro, I have worked a lot with lots of different industries, but I probably have often also looked at sort of high risk industries as one of my focus areas.
So similar to you, Joelle.
I've never worked in academia, Jason.
No, high risk industries.
High risk industries,
Offshore
yes.
petroleum.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty high risk.
Can be.
Can
So's onshore mining and construction.
Yeah. So is working in an office with Joelle. So Karina, you recently, as of last week, attended the IOP conference as well. So that's the Industrial Organisational Psychology conference. Or it was the COP conference, wasn't it? Run by the APS COP.
I don't know.
I don't know what they called it. We didn't go.
I think it was.
Tim from our team went, but Karina, you went. It was 3 days, right, in Perth. There was about 300 participants, from what I hear. There was a heap of posts all over LinkedIn sharing really great learnings from the conference. I was just wondering if you had any highlights from the conference yourself.
Yes, I mean, apart from the fact that it's always really nice to get a community of people, I think conferences often are about community, right? They're about connection, and they're about realising that there are kindred spirits and people kind of tackling the same stuff as you, albeit sometimes from slightly different lenses. But it's also really nice to kind of see actually what the angles are that people are doing things from, and how all of those pieces fit together. I think it is that time where we sort of all piece ourselves together as to our day-to-day, and it's also nice to kind of not be educating or convincing sometimes. Sometimes it's nice to just sit back and go, yep, we kind of all understand in this space, or what our particular perspective is. So that was nice. But also, one of the keynotes, we actually had a commissioner for the unborn from Wales. So Wales has a commissioner around future generations, and so they've actually legislated the idea of that all decisions should be made with a consideration of their impact on future generations. And I think, albeit sometimes it's really challenging to see how anything like that would ever happen within an Australian political system and our background, and also that, but it was really, really wonderful to kind of just envision or see how really, if we were making, those longer term connections and decisions. And I think that sort of interesting space of how we're often talking about, looking after people, and it's not just the immediate, but, how do we sustain well-being and how do we go on? But then this was at a completely longer term scale, right? Of how do
people don't think about 3-year election cycles, like, to make decisions.
Yeah, when you're actually thinking about 100 years from now, that was incredible. So that's probably the highlight for me.
Yeah, nice one. I read lots of good things, and Tim from our team who went along said it was a really great conference. And good to see, it's twice this year now, right? There's been a decent Perth conference. You were also involved in the Work Design conference, wasn't it?
We did. So it has felt like a very strange Perth being the centre of some stuff this year. So
it's great that we can have 2 conferences that were really well attended, right? Because the Work Design conference was also over 300 or 400 people as well, wasn't it? Yeah. So much for people not wanting to travel to Perth. So it's great.
I think, like all of us, right, we're willing to travel to the things that really matter to us, I guess.
Yeah. No, good work. All right, so let's talk about then what we've actually got you on today to talk about, and that is that you've been working with the Mental Health Commission here in WA on a new toolkit to help first responder workplaces prevent harm. So I guess I'd like to start with just, how did this whole project come about?
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess for starters, the Mental Health Commission were one of the initial funders of our Thrive at Work initiative back in the day, to provide some seed funding for this sort of development of a Thrive at Work toolkit, Thrive at Work framework, sort of helping organisations to navigate their way through mental health and wellbeing strategies. But this project in particular came from the fact that the Mental Health Commission hosts, I guess, a lot of the first responder agencies coming together. So sometimes they're sort of health and safety and or well-being officers, psychologists within the first responder agencies that are here that all come together as a community of practice, really, to kind of work on what they can do to best be supporting their first responders. And there had been, and I guess also maybe not surprising to everybody, it's pretty well established that first responders are an at-risk group. They're at risk of mental health issues due to a range of different work design, workplace factors. And there's been things like the Beyond Blue National Mental Health and Wellbeing Study of Police and Emergency Services. There's been lots of different reports sort of showing those sort of higher rates of distress, mental health conditions that exist. So they are a priority group, I guess, as well, sort of this focus area of what could do around that priority group. But I guess where we came in was that there's also, it's not just what you normally think of as potentially the vicarious trauma that's associated with first responders, but there's lots of other org and job factors such as remote work, social isolation, shift work, heap of different things that result in some of the strain, the stresses and the mental health challenges for the workforce. And Mental Health Commission wanted to really look at moving things not just from tertiary kind of supports that exist for first responders, but also to look at what could be done in the prevention space. And I really mean prevention from a potential work design space, so not just early detection space as well. And they thought, given Thrive and the work that we do and what we're really trying to do is really focus on that work design side of things, what could we do? And so it began with this sort of question, of what might we be doing to work with some resources and some opportunities there, particularly though as well, there's a lot of challenge around thinking that work design, you just can't do anything with first responders, because not only are there inherent parts of their work, but the resources are challenging. In many ways they are seen as paramilitary in some ways with hierarchy, and so the level of agency and autonomy that people have. So it was a really interesting problem space actually for us to try and see what would be something that's genuinely fit for purpose that we could move within a lot of constraints actually.
Yeah, you're right. There's such an interesting group, and we do hear that sort of feedback all the time. I think people get confused. They think, oh, we need to either remove all psychosocial hazards or nothing. And because there's some, exposures that can't be eliminated, they think, oh, well, why even do anything in that audience, right? Rather than thinking, well, it's actually more important to look at the things that we can modify rather than just ignore it altogether.
100% agree. Yep. And so a big part of this was to try go, what might be some of those things that we can actually modify?
Yeah. So, definitely much needed. Looking forward to hearing more as we go through this podcast with you.
Yeah, so alluded to it a little bit, but why is it so important to have a toolkit like this for that first responder cohort?
Yeah, I guess one, they are an at-risk group that are there. We have many different demands that are coming at first responders. And so also, I guess the point of this toolkit though was, once we're getting to tertiary controls, once we're looking at potentially resilience, or we're supporting people through EAP or, specialist EAP even, what we're talking about is actually people kind of recovering from particular setbacks or the challenges that they've been exposed to. And what we really saw was missing was the sort of preventative within the workspace. So whilst people could be proactive in their own individual resilience, how do they go about and actually make the working environment the best that it can be, and essentially remove some of the hazards that are there? Because when we look at work design, it's not just, the demands. It was really what other resources are there? What other psychological and structural resources could there be that people, even at an individual level or with their frontline, supervisors, potentially, how can they shape their work that doesn't require a lot of other external kind of supports or resources? that are there. We felt that was really missing.
Yeah, so I think as Jason was saying, that issue around autonomy for first responders, right? So with a lot of those roles that are very prescribed, and we see this, in safety as well, right? Where we're talking about, very potentially dangerous work systems or operations and that sort of thing where, procedural compliance is actually really sometimes actually a matter of life or death. And so the argument is that there's not any opportunity for autonomy there. So again, it's around, kind of looking at it from a different perspective maybe, and looking for opportunities where we can actually give some of that autonomy whilst maintaining those prescriptions where necessary.
Yep, agreed. And I mean, going into that, or where we really wanted to go with the toolkit was to show how one might tackle some of the other aspects of work, because autonomy is an important one, and appropriate decision making, control that's there. But some of the other aspects, and this really came out when we didn't just do literature reviews, we actually did focus groups with the actual first responders in each of the agencies, and they're slightly different across them all. But at one end, I guess, of like what those leverage points that are there are the fact that so mastery is another really important part that sits around, first responders. We talk about agency, but agency is often also there so that we can do our job well, right? It's so that we have the right degree of control to be able to make the choices around when, how, we do our work. But there's also like really doing a good job. And at the end of the day, first responders, it is often that space of, did I do the right thing? Was this the best that I could do? So one might be the restrictions that sit around people doing that, but also it's just that feedback seeking and that feedback giving that is there from a mastery perspective to remove some of that anxiety and actually to act as a resource, because it's not just the meaning and the purpose of the job, it's actually how well we do the job, was actually one that came out across all of the different first responders and actually ended up being one of the core areas of leverage points of how do we improve mastery, for example, when there's not as much agency that could be removed, or potentially some of those other demands can't be removed.
So I'm interested, Karina, what other kinds of information or toolkits are available for first responders, or what were the key gaps as well if there wasn't really much?
Yep. So we really didn't see, otherwise we would have directed them, to those toolkits, I guess. We're all for not replicating things here. The toolkits or the resources that existed were really much more around tertiary control. So they were much more around early detection, help-seeking types of behaviours, what could be done in those areas that were there, and those types of resources, the stigma reduction, help-seeking behaviour, whether that be for families, whether that be for members, whether that be for organisations. And actually, where we saw all of those resources, we have tried to curate them for each of the agencies and refer out to some of those that sit there as well, rather than sort of bringing them in and replicating them.
Yeah, it's consistent with what we've observed. There's lots of that material around, right? And obviously some gaps, as we'll talk about today, that you guys are plugging with this toolkit.
So what are the main goals for this toolkit?
Yeah, okay. What we really wanted, I guess, to tackle or show is that it is possible to change some aspects of work design and improve some of the characteristics that are really important for mental health and wellbeing of first responders. Kind of know work design is important from a mental health and wellbeing, but it's also really important for performance and lifelong learning. So this sort of came from an approach of thinking about mental health and wellbeing quite holistically as well, or leveraging that. So we wanted to promote positive work design to prevent harm and it was really at a job crafting and frontline leader level that this focus was. So it was really also, I guess the intention was to really put behind it some evidence-based practical activities to support the leaders and individuals to be in that proactive crafting of their work, and hopefully, give them something that were really usable tools so that they'd be able to have conversations and activities that would help them around like natural touch points in their work.
Yeah. So I guess creating the conditions where people could realise that there is actually change possible, and then empowering them to think about what that might be.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do was to really look at, I guess, taking the principles from where we've gone with Thrive at Work framework. So we wanted to go, what can be done to support people, I guess, who are experiencing ill health or need further supports? What can be done in that prevention space? And there we really lent into, as I mentioned before, that sort of mastery side of things. So then we're really focused on learning conversations and touch points, and I can talk a bit more about that, in a moment. But then, and also, even from that thriving end, what might be done when people need ongoing learning. So, the sort of stimulating aspects of the job so that things don't actually get boring or monotonous, because there's different parts of first responder work too, right? That's there. So it was also growth across a career that was there. But what we really wanted to do was then think about, because if this was coming from a job crafting kind of angle, or people being supported in that job crafting, we didn't want to make this another to-do, right? Like, it's like, here you have these really busy, really important roles, and here's another activity to do. So what we wanted to do was actually leverage natural touch points for people. So they have operational debrief meetings. How might you use those better? Or when you're starting with the ambulance officers in Western Australia have something called dynamic pairing, which means they're not always with the same ambulance officers or partnered in the same way. How might they build some swift trust with each other to be able to have, again, those good learning conversations that are there? So it was really taking, those natural points and going and giving them conversation guides and resources, both from the individual seeking that feedback potentially, or the other way around, as a leader or a mentor at a particular point, how might they initiate those conversations that were there?
Yeah, and we have very similar conversations with a lot of our clients around, what are the existing organisational routines that you can really use to start having those conversations about psychosocial safety just as part of your normal routines.
Yeah, and so we did it without using any of that language, right? Like, it really was. And actually, the different agencies, based on their culture, based on things, would use different language around that. So for some, it's a high-performing culture. It comes from that side of things. And for others, it was more of a care culture. That you're doing the same things and you're approaching them actually in the same way, but it's kind of like what fits better with the particular culture that was there. So we didn't create, so there's actually five different ones for 5 different agencies, because we really wanted to also make sure that it fit with, as you're saying, like the natural touch points within each of the agencies, which look a little bit different. Our rangers, for example, have slightly different ones, to police through to our prison officers, around particular things. So they needed to be slightly adjusted. But also, some of that language and terminology and the way that, I won't say maturity, because it's not really maturity side of things. It's just the different lenses or angles that it came from.
Yeah, I really do love the what you're talking about there in terms of the level of the guidance that's provided. We see a lot of organisations in, say, the psychosocial risk management area really thinking about organisational level controls like policies and training and that sort of thing. But we generally see the closer you get to the individual in terms of like individual job crafting or team level interventions, there's a greater positive impact that can be had. So it's great to hear that, this is very much focused around what can a line leader do with their direct team, rather than waiting for something to happen at corporate, which is going to take years to flow down. Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode. So you mentioned already the Thrive at Work framework. I think a lot of our listeners would be familiar with this, but for those that aren't, can you maybe just give us a little bit of an understanding about what this framework is? Because obviously it underpins this whole project.
Yes, for sure. The Thrive at Work framework is a framework that myself and two of my colleagues, Professor Mark Griffin and Professor Sharon Parker, developed together. I mean, we started on about 8 years ago now, I think, and it was really about integrating what were disparate kind of focuses on mental health and well-being. So I mentioned before, sort of this, I guess, spectrum of mental health and well-being. And when I say sort of ill health, I mean unsupported ill health. That's there, what can be done to help in that space, or if people are looking at that space through to prevention, through to promotion, but actually that we're talking about symptoms of ill health through to potentially normal functioning, through to this sort of proactive, engaged, lifelong learning kind of side of the spectrum. We wanted to look across disciplines around evidence bases that were there, but actually also, Jason, as you were talking about the systems level, a really big important part of this was not just that, but we also really wanted to tease out what can organisations do at an individual level, but also what can they provide at the systems level. And so the idea behind the framework was also to really be pushing the conversation from what were often tertiary individual level focuses on supporting mental health through to what were broader system level things that were also moving towards, prevention that's there. And so I've often said the Thrive model was sort of developed to smuggle the vegetables in, and the vegetables were work design, so it's like, surprise, it's also about the work that was there, because each of these pieces are important, right? We also need, to have the supports around early help seeking and stigma reduction and all of these aspects. So they're not important that are there, but we wanted to expand that. That was there. And so I guess, that was the framework within the prevent harm, I guess, of relevance here within the prevent. So we have 3 pillars: mitigate illness, prevent harm, and promote thriving. And within those, we have the 3 blocks, building blocks that we say that are within them. The bottom ones of those 3 in each of the pillars is individual. The top 2 are more systems level ones that sit there around that. And so when we actually talk about work design and we talk about even where, the core of psychosocial risk prevention should sit, it often really sits at the systems level blocks within a prevent harm pillar. And that's really where the work design sits.
Yeah, I love that idea about smuggling the vegetables. And if you think about the timing of when, you built this model, you really had to, right? Like, no one was interested in work design. They were all interested in the tertiary stuff like EAP and mental health first aid and that sort of thing, right?
Correct. And we didn't have the changes to the work health and safety laws as of yet. So these sort of conversations weren't really there yet. We were more drawing on many decades of research around, how work actually impacts and strains people potentially. That's there. And it was really, like you were saying, it was really in this space of workplaces are a place where a lot of people are and congregate. Hence, it's a good place from a public health perspective to educate people about mental health and encourage early help-seeking behaviour. And then there would be this sort of talk around, well, having access to work is good for people's well-being, but not really the conversations around, what is it about work, or it's actually the factors around work that can actually also both break people but also provide them particularly positive aspects for their mental health and well-being.
Yeah, that's so great to see over the last decade, right? There has been a shift and people now are interested in learning about work design purely for work design purposes rather than thinking about it as like a tertiary mental health intervention.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess if we think then about the toolkit and each of those areas, so what guidance was provided in the protect aspect of that for first responders?
Yeah, so we thought we would enter these conversations that could be had. So again, it was either coming from, so it's guidance as the individual first responder who might wish to seek some support or some help, and how would you initiate a conversation with an appropriate person around that. And that was also some of the guidance then around the right place and time and those sorts of things, just sort of thinking about that. And who might that be? So it's actually quite different for different first responders as to who they have to talk to. So they may have mentors, depending if they're a new firefighter, they may not have a permanent station that they're posted in. So it was kind of like thinking about who might you access around that. And then we pitched this sort of first one as this learning conversations. So really thinking about who might be, how would you have a good learning conversation or seek a good learning partner. So as I said, it was like right time and place, as well as the sort of natural touch points. And then depending, it was, things that would be one-on-one operational debriefs or after action reviews, as they're often, called, or potentially, if it came from the leader side, it could be team debriefs as well, or hot debriefs that are there as well. And so there was those guides. For one of the agencies, we used a persona type of approach. So we actually said to police, that if you were leading these conversations, you could think of yourself as the coach in this area that was here, versus as we went through ones that were more around support around ill health, you were the conduit, and then potentially the guide that was sitting in the more learning space. And I guess what we were trying to do when I say the coach here was, you are bringing the best out in someone and guiding. This wasn't about critiquing someone or having all of the knowledge that was there. So I guess what we were really trying to do was look at some reflective learning and some opportunities to facilitate that was there in the prevention space. So that protect or prevention, space that was there was, really making people recognise one of the best things you can do for your own mental health and well-being is to be able to build these relationships where you can actually have these conversations around your mastery and what kind of feedback you're getting and what kind of support that you can seek to make sure that you're doing your job the best you can do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting approach there. So starting with the individual and sort of exploring, and then what can I do about what I've uncovered through this conversation.
Yeah, because what we actually found was in the focus groups that one of the things that impacted the people the most around their work was actually that there aren't touch points, natural touch points where that sort of feedback is given. So it's potentially given in training, in a very guided way, or it's given when they're first on the job where there's almost like a checklist of sign off around certain competencies, or they're the sort of whole team debrief, which is like what went wrong for everyone, operationally. So that learning space of an individual being vulnerable and going, oh, this was going through my head, or I'm not quite sure what I did there, or how do I ask for help and how do I do those things, which is often then what people will ruminate on or think about and might be some of the things that lend themselves to that anxiety. There aren't a lot of those things that's sitting there, so people are maybe being encouraged to seek help when they have reached, particular mental health strains or conditions, to say, okay, but not actually to recognise proactively some of the things in which I'm going to be potentially anxious or are going to be putting pressures on me, are those sorts of things. And so, it's not the obvious kind of way in which to go about and do things, but it was actually a way that individuals could both show care for each other, as well as, it's actually a work redesign intervention, as non-complicated as it seems. It's actually job crafting to seek feedback, or it's actually changing the structure of a handover or a debrief or something like that, which is, again, a work redesign intervention potentially, albeit at a very local level. We felt like we really did want, though, this to feel authentic. I didn't want to go, oh, well, it's either resilience training or it's your job crafting responsibilities, to do this. So we needed to make sure that these were the things that at least felt really meaningful and or authentic for people, and lent into the natural behaviours of the first responders. Like these types of, they have operational briefings. They just, why? It's that kind of cognitive appraisal, or the, intended HR versus the perceived HR, if we sometimes say that, what was the intent of them? So, I mean, I'm not sure you guys have spoken about this sort of thing before, but, often performance conversations are actually ones in which people can be given a lot of role clarity and they can be given a lot of things, but they're not really leveraged as a control around those types of things. And it's just a similar way in which there could be formal or informal ways of doing those types of things.
Yeah, so I guess it feels kind of like supervision that we do as psychologists, right? Like either sort of formally when we're building out an area of competence, or just as part of routine good practice to maintain the sort of professional development.
And we do it for two things, right? We do it for our competence so that we deliver the best services, but we also do it for our own mental health and well-being. So it's an interesting one that type of supervision, peer supervision, hasn't been moved across to really important industries or sectors, and other professions.
We sort of, this comes up quite a lot when we're talking to people from different professions, and like law is another one, right, where there's all of that vicarious trauma, and there's just no, all throughout our degree we're trained in reflective practice and all of that sort of thing, and there's none of that where, the vicarious trauma risk for people working in law is just as bad as it is for people working in psychology. So lots of professions would benefit from that approach, definitely.
I mean, we could all do with good feedback, right? Like I think, I used to teach a unit, which was around, and I remember some of the studies that would also always say that managers rate giving performance feedback as one of the things that they hate the most. And individual employees would always say that it's one of the things they value the most, right? Like that's there. And so there's this permanent disconnect that exists around that. And so what we wanted to do too was to take, I just think there's so much opportunity for all of us to be educated more on, because in there is like what's important, what's the value of our job, how are we seen, we're putting in all of this effort, and we want to make sure that it not only is it just being seen and recognised, but we're actually doing something that we're, setting out to achieve, right? So
yeah, you're putting the effort in the right areas. But it's I love that bottom up, or the employee seeking out that conversation rather than the line manager initiating. We've had a lot of people say, we'll just put that into. No, the recommendation is just put into your one-on-ones. And most organisations I speak to, they don't have a regular cadence of one-on-ones between the line manager and the worker. So
no. So what we wanted to do was, where possible, try have it pushed from both directions. So what you've done is you've prepped and you've created an environment so that when that individual seeks that out, there is some guidance and some supports that are there. So for some of them, they actually exist as you can have the conversation, or you can have the templates and the checklists that you can actually sit down together with if you need to. Nobody needs to be perfect around this. It's the intent, right, that's coming in around this. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, very cool. So tell us then about the promote wellbeing aspects. What sort of guidance was given around that?
Yeah, okay. So around promote, I guess for us, we took that from where we have the promote thriving kind of angle. And so thriving for us is this really active state, which can actually sometimes be an uncomfortable state because it's one of learning and growth side of things that were there. And what we really wanted to do here was have conversation templates for career conversations, actually. So that's quite different to how you're going, do you want to talk about an incident that you went to or something, and actually that learning. But it was where if somebody was maybe feeling like, yep, thanks, got it, we're good around these things, or possibly stagnating in their role, what might be those opportunities for potentially more growth, more stimulating work, and those opportunities. So there were, also resources around how to direct people. For some, it was like, what other job opportunities are there, and internally within the resources, because often, again, people don't think of, I'm feeling kind of lost in my job, or I don't have this purpose in my job anymore, potentially from that, I've gained my mastery in my role. And so it's not thought of as a well-being conversation, that's there. We even think of boring, monotonous, work as a psychosocial hazard. But what do we do? If we're stuck within that, sometimes perhaps that needs to be redirected. So yeah, it was both for initiating and conducting career conversations that were there as well.
Yeah, that need for, like you say, mastery, but also that growth and development as well. I think one of the problems that often happens, right, in teams is that you'll have a really good performer because they've reached that point of mastery, and then the leader's like, I want them doing that job forever. But that person might not feel the same way, right?
Correct. So again, what we've been trying to do is make it not particularly about the personality or the individual skills of an individual. What are some good ways in which you could actually have this conversation, around asking specifically, could you connect me with this area, or could you connect me with this branch, or, those types of things, those types of asks that are there, rather than necessarily asking the individual, what do you think I should do with my career now? Because I agree, Jason, maybe that's keep up the good work and, stay here is not necessarily the case. Or how might they explore that, utilising the different other resources that exist in their agency? So, yeah.
All right. So that brings us around to mitigate illness.
And they're obviously doing heaps of this already, right? Because that's where all the interventions sit.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. And so, like I mentioned before, a big part of this was actually curating those resources. So whilst there's a lot, I guess they're not particularly curated, right? Like around specialist types of potential issues, where were those resources that are there? Where's the internal ones? Where's all the information on the EAP? What have you got? What options are there? Actually, because there's an overwhelming amount of stuff sort of mattered everywhere. So we tried to help create some structure, I guess, to that. And that was also worked closely with the Mental Health Commission around those, as well as then the agencies themselves around the specific things that were there. And we even included in there some conversation guides for individuals who might be reaching out to those supports, just to start having those conversations, because it might be a little scary, right, to go to your GP and have that first conversation or something. So we just wanted to walk through some of those along the lines of these conversation guides. But we also, I guess, we structured them around, warning signs and examples of feelings or behaviours, that were there. And then there was the 2 conversation templates again, like the one was checking in on someone, and then the other was speaking up and asking for help. But we were relatively light around those, again, just drawing on that people have done a much better job at that than what we can bring to the table around this.
Yeah, I think definitely important to have that all kind of accessible though, and especially when there's so much available for people, so that they can sort of go to one place and see what's there and actually what's going to be the right place for me to go for whatever the issue is.
What you're saying, consulting Facebook on like what's the best way to seek help is not.
No, you should go to Reddit.
Reddit, yeah.
So, yes, you both joke there, but it was one of these things that I was concerned actually at the start around pulling together these resources in this space, because it isn't our area of expertise. It's not really what we do. We wanted really to focus on work and work design. But it was actually, again, it was the feedback from the sort of user consultation around just knowing that they had that there, or if a conversation went from a place of, we're here to have this learning conversation, and then there's this sort of indication or noticing that, hang on, we might need to redirect this conversation into one in which we can look at the supports. It's that kind of care conversation that was there, that it was there on hand, that there was like these materials and these things, not let's both look at Reddit together, situation or something like that. So in the end, we thought, actually, if that's going to help provide that safety net or that blanket or be that piece, it was like an important part of the puzzle, I guess we thought.
Yeah, and just finding the right information can be such a big barrier for actually people getting the help that they need as well, right? Like every friction point.
Correct. And when we tried to put it together, we were like, oh, this is actually really, really hard to gather all of this information. And we're not experts in, clinical health and some of this support that's here, but pretty, good at integrating bits of information, and I'm still a psychologist, that's here, and I'm having a hard time around this. So,
Yeah, your casual user, yeah, for sure. So you've spoken a lot about this this toolkit. When is it going to be made available, and how's that going to happen?
Yeah, so it is timely, I guess. It's pretty hot off the press as we have it now. Agencies have them in their hands, and they're all working out or have plans around potentially embedding them. So we were talking about natural touch points, for people to use the toolkits. What we're also looking for is natural touch points to embed them. So, for example, when we have station officer training, or there are new recruits of firefighters, that it can be included as part of their initial training. That's there. The same for paramedics and ambulance officers when they're going through their training and their courses. So this is like starting straight away. So what we're wanting to do is actually embed it into existing, upskilling and training opportunities too, with an opportunity then to also, depending on the resources that the different agencies have, that they would use their mental health and wellbeing officers who are going out around, to different stations or branches, or the peer supporters, to be able to be using these as sort of, some of them might be more, your lunch and learn type of training or engagement topics. But again, to be in the arsenal or the toolkit that moves beyond, here are just the tertiary supports that we have. So we've created the training modules for those individuals so that they can kind of take them and then they can upskill others. And the year ahead will see us trying to follow those journeys that are there and possibly create some use cases, some case studies, and then to start to kind of bring that together as, again, a community of practice, or refine them and use them. And really like to think that the learnings here might inspire and spark learnings, not just for other first responder agencies, around the country or the world, but also other industries, right? Because none of the things we're talking about here don't really resonate, around those two. So we'll be evaluating, we'll be learning, and very soon, either watch this space or reach out to us via Thrive at Work, and we'll be putting them up for people to be able to grab them as well. And they'll see, they're designed for the agencies that are there, but it should all make sense, as usable resources for anyone who's really interested.
Yeah, when you said that the agencies now have them available, is that this Western Australian group or is
Yeah,
it
they are.
broader
So
than that? Yeah.
no, it's not. It was the Mental Health Commission. Yeah, funded these for 5 of our agencies. So we have police, we have firefighters, we have corrective services, we have ambulance, and we have our parks and rangers. So if I don't know, there'll be different acronyms in different states, but for us, it's the Department of Conservation Biodiversity.
So, what's the sort of time frame before other agencies might be able to access these resources?
They can access them now, I guess, as in they're welcome to reach out to us, and we can share them and things that are there, and everyone will be able to look at them online as well. To download them. They're just obviously each of the agencies have their resources, their stuff, so they would maybe need a little bit of customization to be fit for purpose for another agency. We talk about the principles that transfer across, but one of the things we learned is you couldn't create one toolkit for the 5 agencies because the language is different, right? Like slightly different language can mean something. And when you're really busy as well, or you're using something and you're embedding it, like having to do that other translation work while you're reading through something and go, that means the same as this, or we could use that way. You want these, if they're frontline, you want these to read as practically and usefully and in the normal language that everyone uses as possible.
Absolutely. Well, what we'll do is we'll drop in the show notes then where people might be able to follow up and get some of these resources if they can't find them themselves. Cool. Well, Karina, despite your youthful appearance, you've been doing this for a couple of decades. Danish, right? Like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, one of the questions we like to ask at this point is, what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health? You've seen a lot transpire over the last couple of decades. So, what are your hopes for the future?
I feel like I have had an agenda. We talked about smuggling vegetables in, right? And so I guess my future, hopes are going to be along those lines, right? It's that we actually really see the value of good work design when supporting, people's mental health and well-being. But I guess I would add to that we also see that it's achievable. I think that it's been talked about, today, that sometimes it feels like, we can't change certain aspects, or that seems too hard, so let's not bother and let's move to something that we think that we can change. I hope even through what we're talking about here, just learning conversations or career conversations, these are possible in any workplace, regardless, And so, yes, I think, also, I think the fact that when we're talking about our mental health and well-being at work, that it becomes normal for us to be talking proactively about what we need in our work, and that we aren't just having conversations around our work when it's kind of breaking us, right? And that becomes normal. Like that, hey, I need some feedback, or I'm not really sure what I'm doing this thing for, or I don't know how to reach out to, someone to get my job done, or this is really, I'm really bored, or I'm not using these skills, or any of those types of things. And that we're not just talking about, for example, bullying and harassment or excessive workload and those types of things that are there, which of course we should also be raising and talking about, but that it moves the dial to those things that are meaningful and that are then also really in the prevention space, and that we also move to that sort of understanding that good mental health and well-being is good for business, and all the values that's there.
Yeah, I think they're all admirable hopes. And I'd love to, see that point, right, where we get down to the employee level, understanding the link between their work and their well-being, rather than just going, why do I feel crap? But even line managers don't have that kind of level of understanding yet. So there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I really hear you about that line manager level too. So I actually think another missing thing, we talked about individuals versus work systems, but right in the middle of those two, right, is the frontline leader. And so I also think that much more of that sort of focus on that we're also not just designing good work based on individuals or what's maybe health and safety psychology professionals designing it in the background for people, but that there's leaders, you know, and the incumbents in the job are part of that design too.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, last question for you today, Karina. Do you have words of advice for listeners who are wanting to work in the field of psychological health and safety?
I guess please come. Welcome to the community. We could do with more people, you know, I guess we're all, for all the reasons that we talk about, you know, from the individual through to what needs to be done at leadership, through to all the system level things, you know, we're actually talking about the makeup of organisations. And so work health and safety, it's multidisciplinary, right? It takes all sorts of different people and it's multi-pronged and it takes an army. It needs an army to tackle it. And I guess, yeah, I'll finish with that, right? Like maybe we are all of us, I think, who work in this space are a piece of that puzzle, you know, that are there. So possibly also realise that we can't change it all, right? I think, you know, Jason, you were talking about, you know, it's sort of seeing the changes over time. We sure have. And so sometimes it might feel like you're, you know, arguing for something that's potentially not valued or it's not understood or it's not well integrated. But when you look across multiple years or as we're kind of going a decade, you start to really see those changes. And I think we are shifting the dial and we are changing conversations, you know, that are there. And that takes, hopefully, you know, more academia and research, and it takes more practitioners of all sorts, you know, and it takes everybody, you know, engaging in trying and saying back, not correct, not fixed, you know, or and conversations with our policy makers and our regulators and, you know, that continuous refinement that's there. So, yeah, join us, I guess.
That's a long way of saying join us.
Yes, please come.
You're very welcome, yes. Karina, it's it's been a pity that it's been almost 4 years to have you on the podcast, but you finally made it. I think that was a really great conversation. I'm sure our listeners will really enjoy it. So thank you for your valuable time and contributing.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
All right. Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do record these over video when we have the interviews with our guests. Sorry for not telling you that before, Karina. We will be sharing the video on YouTube, on the FlourishTX YouTube channel. You'll also find snippets of this and some of our previous episodes on the FlourishTX LinkedIn page. While you're over on LinkedIn, you'll find that Joelle and I are there way too often. And if you want to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out and we'll be sure to drop in some further information on how to access the toolkit that Karina was talking about today. So thanks, everyone. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow FlourishTX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.